Imagine you stand in a corridor of mud with a bow in your hands and sickness still hot in your lungs. You see two walls of dark trees squeezing the world into a narrow throat. You feel the road behind you die, because the road ahead is blocked by France itself, steel, banners, horses, and men who believe your hunger is already a victory. You move with the English column like a body with one exhausted heartbeat. Boots tear. Ankles sink. Every step pulls as if the earth wants payment. You taste old smoke from Harfla on your tongue, but Harfla is not safety, it is a fever that follows you. Men cough in wet bursts. Somebody vomits and keeps walking. Nobody stops, because stopping means falling behind, and falling behind means being swallowed by whatever hunts the edges of a retreat. A rider tears up the line. You see the horse's flared nostrils, the foam at the bit, the panic in the man's knees as he bounces in the saddle. He shouts something that gets passed down like a spark down dry straw. The French are not behind. The French are ahead. That single fact tightens every throat. You feel it, an invisible hand closing around the column. Some men mutter prayers. Some curse. Some laugh too sharply, because the mind looks for any exit. You look at your bow and feel its ridiculous lightness compared to the rumor of plate armor waiting down the road. But you also feel the string tucked close to your body, kept dry against your chest like a secret. In this wet world, a dry bowstring is not comfort, it is survival. Scouts stagger back with conflicting stories. One swears the enemy is only a few thousand. Another says the fields crawl with nobles, each one gleaming like a coin, each one worth more than your whole village. Words collide. Nobody knows what to believe. But the road stays blocked no matter which story is true. Therefore, the only question that matters becomes simple. How does an exhausted column fight through a gate made of lances? You see the king, not as a painting, not as a legend, but as motion, a helmet turning, a hand cutting the air, a voice that stays controlled when everything else shakes. Discipline hardens. Stragglers get shoved back into place. Men who want to run get stared down until shame pins their feet. The choice happens in the open, and it is brutal in its clarity. The column does not scatter. The column does not sprint for Calais like a frightened animal. The column turns and prepares to fight. That decision is a threshold. You feel it as a physical step. Behind that step is marching, hunger, and the hope of walls. Ahead is a field that becomes a courtroom, and your body is the evidence. Orders snap forward. Archers push to the front. You move with them because the line needs teeth. A bundle of rough-cut stakes gets thrown down. You grab one. It bites your palm with splinters. You see axes and knives flash. Men begin sharpening points with frantic economy, no artistry, only function. Every shaved chip of wood is a countdown. Every thud of an axe is a drumbeat that says contact is coming. You kneel in mud and drive your stake down. The ground resists, then gives, then holds. It feels like hammering a nail into the world. You drive another. And another. The stake line grows like a row of fangs. The message is plain. Horses die here. Beyond the narrowing field, the French host churns. You cannot count them. You only see depth, layers of men, banners stacked behind banners, helmets like a spill of metal. Horses snort and stamp. You hear harness straps tested, buckles pulled, cuirasses knocked into place. That sound, leather creaking, metal clicking, is not music. It is preparation for impact. The hunger returns like an accusation. Your belly cramps. You remember what rations feel like, but the memory is useless. Somebody tears at a scrap of bread so hard it breaks like stone. Another chews something that looks like boiled leather. The mouth works anyway. The body tries to trick itself into strength. But strength is leaking out of the column day by day, and the French look like they arrive full. Therefore, fear becomes more than emotion. It becomes arithmetic. Sickness from Harfla stalks the line. You see a man's skin shine with sweat even in the cold. He shivers. He tries to hide it because weakness draws punishment from enemies and from comrades alike. He coughs again, wet and deep, and then he strings his bow with hands that tremble. You feel the same tremor in your own muscles, not from cold but from depletion. Yet the bow still bends. The string still bites your fingers. The weapon does not care about your feelings. Everything is wet. The ground is wet, the air is wet, the cloth clings. But the bowstring must stay dry. Therefore you keep it under your cap, pressed to your scalp, warmed by your own miserable heat. The mind obsesses on small maintenance because small maintenance decides whether an arrow flies true or falls like a dead twig. One soaked string can get you killed faster than a sword. Rumor slithers down the ranks. Some say French nobles want ransoms, not slaughter. Some say French peasants want blood for every raid across the channel. Some say the French argue among themselves, squabbling over who earns glory. You don't know what is true. Uncertainty becomes its own weapon because the mind cannot brace for what it cannot picture. Then you see the ground chosen for the stand, and the fear changes shape. Two woods press close on either side, forcing the field into a funnel. It is not a grand open plain where cavalry can wheel wide. It is a tight mouth where a large army must feed itself forward in a compressed stream. You see it before you understand it fully. Numbers can become a problem when numbers cannot spread. The French do not look worried. They look offended that you exist in front of them. You see bright surcoats, polished harness, plumes that bob like arrogance made visible. They shift and rearrange in thick blocks. You feel the weight of their confidence press against your ribs. But the funnel stays the funnel. Therefore, the field itself becomes your ally if the line holds. Final preparations hit like a storm. You plant stakes at an angle, pointing outward, each one a promise of impalement. You pace out distance with your eyes, because pace is all you own. You knock a test arrow, draw, and release into the soft earth just to feel the rhythm. Your fingers already sting. You flex them because numb fingers do not draw clean. Somebody near you spits, and the spit disappears into mud like it never existed. A murmur runs. The king moves among the men. You see him close enough to notice mud on his boots like yours. That sight lands hard. It does not remove fear, but it shapes fear into stubbornness. Therefore, men tighten grips and straighten backs, because shame is a leash and leadership holds the leash. The French line begins to move. At first it looks slow, almost casual. But then the earth answers. You feel vibration through the mud and into your bones. You hear a dull roar, not a single sound, but many. Hooves, feet, metal, shouting. Your mouth goes dry even in the wet air. The first cavalry tries to form. Horses surge forward, but the ground fights back. Hooves slip. A horse's leg skids sideways, and the animal jerks its head as if surprised the world refuses to cooperate. Riders haul on reins, trying to keep lines straight. But the funnel compresses them. Therefore, the charge does not become a clean blade. It becomes a blunt mass struggling to gain shape. The order comes. You raise the bow. You feel the familiar tension build as the stave bends, a hard curve of potential. Your fingers pinch the string. You draw to anchor. Your shoulder burns. You release. The arrow leaves with a snap that feels like a bite. You do not watch it politely. You immediately reach for another. Draw, anchor, release. Draw, anchor, release. It is work, not romance. The air fills with a screaming swarm. You see arrows stitch into the advancing shapes. One strikes a horse's face. The animal rears, throwing its rider sideways. Another arrow hits a shoulder gap. A man jerks, staggers, and vanishes under the press behind him. The French keep coming because pride pushes as hard as discipline. But the field demands payment for every step. Mud clings to boots and hooves like hands. Men at arms lower visors and march forward in armor that looks invincible, but the armor drags, heavy and hungry for oxygen. Therefore, every breath becomes shorter, sharper, more desperate. You keep loosing arrows until your fingers go numb. Pain becomes a dull constant, like a second heartbeat. You do not see targets. You see visors. You see shoulders. You see horses' eyes, wide and white-rimmed, reflecting terror they cannot explain. The line shouts, and the shout becomes a long, ragged exhale of fear and fury. Then the French men-at-arms reach the center of the funnel, and the real horror begins. The front ranks meet the resistance of your line and the resistance of the ground at the same time. They cannot spread out. Those behind keep pushing because they do not understand what the front feels. Pressure builds. Metal bodies slam into metal bodies. The front ranks start to fall, not from wounds alone but from physics. You see a man go down on one knee, then disappear as another trips over him. Armor hits mud with a slap. A helmeted head tries to rise, but boots crush fingers. A visor opens and a face appears, red, panicked, suddenly human. He tries to inhale, but his chest is pinned by the weight of men pressing from behind. The mud takes him like a mouth. The French are supposed to be the unstoppable weight of chivalry. But in this funnel, weight becomes congestion. Therefore, their strength turns into a jammed machine, gears grinding against each other until the whole mechanism screams. The order shifts. Archers stop shooting because the press is too close. You drop the bow and the loss feels like losing a limb. But you do not have time to mourn tools. Hands grab mallets, knives, hatchets, anything that can bite through a gap. You wade forward and the mud tries to steal your feet. You feel your calf cramp. You force the leg to move anyway because stopping here means being swallowed by the mass. Now the fight becomes intimate. You are close enough to smell sweat trapped under steel, sour and hot. You hear gasps inside helmets, the wet rasp of men trying to breathe through slits. You see eyes through visors, eyes that flick and widen when they realize the ground betrays them. A noble's gloved hand grabs at your sleeve, not to strike, but to steady himself. He is drowning on land. You raise a mallet. It feels heavier than it should, because hunger has hollowed you out. You swing anyway. The impact rings through your bones. A helmet dents. The man inside jolts. He does not fall cleanly. He collapses into the press, and the press holds him upright like a corpse pinned in a door. Therefore you stab at the gaps, under an arm, at a throat, behind a knee, because that is where armor stops being a wall and becomes a trap. Someone screams in French. Someone answers in English. The voices lose language and become animal sound. You feel your breath turn ragged, not from running, but from pushing against bodies that do not yield. The mud splashes up your shins. It is thick, not like water, but like paste. It sucks at every movement, making every step a decision. A Frenchman swings a weapon and misses because his elbow cannot extend. He is too packed to fight the way his training demands. Therefore, his expensive mastery becomes useless, and he fights like any desperate man, grabbing, clawing, trying to drag someone down so he can climb over. You see an English man-at-arms shoulder into the crush, shield up, trying to keep the line from buckling. An arrow juts from his thigh like a broken branch. He does not stop. He cannot stop. He pushes because if he gives an inch, the jam breaks through and everything behind him dies. The stakes matter now. Horses that try to force their way and meet wooden points. A horse screams, a sound so raw it punches through every other noise. It rears and falls sideways, taking men down with it. The French rear ranks stumble as the front turns into a pile. Therefore, the attack becomes less like a wave and more like a wreck, a chain collision that keeps adding bodies. The fog of war thickens. A shout runs down the English line, an attack on the baggage. Another threat. Something behind. You don't know if it is real. You only feel the way attention snaps backward like a whip crack. Heads turn. A gap almost opens. Somebody yells to hold. Somebody else yells to turn. In the middle of killing, uncertainty becomes a second battlefield. You feel a spike of terror because everything depends on cohesion. If the line fractures, the French numbers finally breathe and spread, and then the funnel stops helping. Therefore, every man becomes a nail hammered into place by fear. You stay forward even as part of the mind begs to run to the rear and protect whatever little property remains. Prisoners appear in clusters, dragged or stumbling toward the back. Some French surrender because they cannot move. Some surrender because their arms go numb from being pinned. You see a knight lift his visor with shaking hands, trying to speak, trying to bargain with a voice that cannot carry in the roar. Ransom is supposed to be the logic of this kind of war. But logic breaks under pressure. Then an order snaps through the confusion, hard, sharp, unbelievable. Prisoners must be killed. You feel the world tilt. Not because mercy matters in a storybook way, but because the order reveals raw fear. The line believes a renewed assault is possible. The line believes the prisoners can pick up weapons and turn the battle from inside. You do not know if reinforcements arrive. You do not know if the baggage attack is real. You only know this. Time is a knife at the throat. Therefore, survival collides with every rule of chivalry, and the collision is ugly. You see men hesitate. You see others obey without thinking because thinking is slow and slow is death. You hear pleading in a language you barely understand. You hear the wet thud of blows. The mind tries to turn away, but the body is still in the mud, still holding a weapon, still trapped inside the mechanism of a battle that does not care about songs. The French forward motion finally fails. Not with a grand announcement, but with a gradual loss of pressure. The push from behind weakens. The mass that pins you begins to sag. Men who stand a moment ago now sit in the mud like broken puppets, hands hanging, heads lolling. The roar becomes ragged and then breaks into scattered shouts. Therefore silence arrives in fragments, like breath returning after almost drowning. You look down and realize the mud is no longer just mud. It churns with broken arrows, torn straps, splintered stakes, dropped daggers, and bodies that never stand again. A helmet floats half-submerged like a bull. A gauntlet lies palm up as if asking for help. The ground looks alive because it moves under the weight of shifting, struggling men. Survivors stumble. Some limp. Some crawl. You see an English archer sit back on his heels, stare at his hands, and begin to laugh without sound because the mind refuses to accept it. He expects to die because he is weaker, but he lives. Therefore, the story begins to form in the mind, not as myth, but as an answer to a question that haunts every battlefield. How does the smaller force endure? You feel the mechanism even if you cannot name it. The battlefield is engineered. A funnel between woods forces compression. A stake line denies cavalry the clean impact it needs. Disciplined volleys punish any forward movement that lacks cover. The enemy's overconfidence chooses speed and prestige over coordination. Therefore, strength without maneuver becomes a liability, and the proudest armor becomes a prison when the wearer cannot rise. Chivalry does not die as an idea in a single moment, but you see it drown as a system. Ransom only works if prisoners can be controlled. Armor only works if lungs can fill and legs can stand. Noble command only works if it can coordinate in chaos instead of jostling for glory. In the crush, titles do not lift bodies out of mud. Therefore, the field becomes a machine that grinds social order into the same paste as everyone else. You search the ground for anything useful because victory does not fill stomachs by itself. A fallen quiver still holds arrows. A belt can be cut into strips. A dagger can be taken. Hands shake as they work because adrenaline drains and exhaustion rushes in like floodwater. Somewhere a man calls for a friend and gets no answer. Somewhere another man pries at a visor and finds a face that no longer reacts. Therefore, the cost counts itself in silence, not in speeches. The dead are too many to honor properly. The living are too few to carry them. The mud holds what it takes. You feel that truth in your knees when you try to step and the ground resists like glue. You see blood darken the earth until it all becomes one color. One man tries to drink and discovers his water tastes like iron because his lips are split. Therefore, celebration stays thin, because the body still suffers even when the line holds. Now the mind tries to make sense of what just happens. The French are supposed to be the strongest. They arrive with numbers, wealth, and steel. But they march into a bottleneck as if the bottleneck is not real. They stack men into depth as if more bodies automatically mean more power. They let prestige outrun planning. Therefore, the smaller force survives, not through magic, but through leverage, terrain, preparation, and the enemy's refusal to respect friction. You feel the lesson settle like a weight. Not a comfortable lesson. A dangerous one. Because it means victory can belong to whoever controls the conditions, not whoever looks impressive. It means confidence can be a weapon against its owner. It means a narrow field can defeat a wide army. The scene begins to blur as time pulls you forward out of AD 1415. The mud remains on your boots in memory, but the world around you changes. You see a modern hallway that narrows under pressure. You see a digital system that jams when too many requests hit at once. You see an organization with prestige and resources overcommit into a bottleneck, too many approvals, too much bureaucracy, too much faith in the brand. The strongest still loses when movement stops. Therefore, Agincourt is not a fairy tale about a miracle weapon. It is a case file about bottlenecks, logistics, and human psychology flipping a power imbalance in minutes. Now comes the verdict, counted in the only currency war respects. The survivors breathe, but their lungs burn. The wounded live, but pain follows them home. The prisoners die, and the stain does not wash away. The noble host collapses into mud, and a social promise, protection through armored superiority, shows its limits. Therefore, the victory costs more than arrows, because it trades illusions for bodies. Now comes the mirror. You see the same pattern whenever confidence charges into constraint. A team rushes into a deadline with no slack. A leader stacks plans on plans without testing the ground. A giant system assumes smaller rivals cannot hurt it, therefore it ignores the narrow passage where one failure blocks everything. Do you see it? The mud is any friction that pride refuses to respect. The stakes are any preparation that turns momentum into self-destruction. One last question remains, and it cannot be answered by searching a page. When the corridor narrows and pressure builds, when bodies press from behind and fear shouts that mercy is weakness, what becomes of you? Do you become the weight that crushes the front, or the mind that notices the funnel and chooses a different path before the ground begins to drink people whole?